The impacts of anti-rights movements on sex workers. Anti-rights movements push to restrict the human rights of others. They include religious fundamentalists, ethnic nationalists, fundamental feminists, abolitionist groups, and others. These movements have different focuses, including anti-sex workers' rights, anti-LGBT plus rights, anti-trans rights and anti-gender diversity, anti-sexual and reproductive health and rights, anti-migrants' rights, anti-key populations' rights, anti-black, people of colour, ethnic minority and indigenous peoples' rights, and others. Anti-rights tactics and impacts. Alliances between anti-rights actors increase the strength and influence of anti-rights movements. This enables them to consolidate funding, promote harmful policies, and enter institutions of power. Many anti-rights narratives and policies are tied to the anti-trafficking movement. By conflating sex work with trafficking and exploitation, anti-trafficking organisations justify increased border policing, anti-migration policies, and violent raid and rescue operations. Fundamental feminists and abolitionist groups have influenced governments to adopt the end demand model, criminalising sex workers' clients. The end demand model is promoted as a measure to combat exploitation and promote gender equality, despite evidence that it exacerbates exploitation and violence for sex workers. Anti-rights narratives promote harmful and discriminatory public health policies, including those criminalising sex work, drug use, same-sex relations and HIV exposure, non-disclosure and transmission. Anti-rights movements have advocated against access to comprehensive, rights-based sexual and reproductive health and rights services. Anti-rights movements negatively impact sex workers of all genders. By framing sex work as a form of oppression against cisgender women, anti-sex worker movements undermine women's rights and autonomy while invisibilising male, trans and gender diverse sex workers. Trans and gender diverse sex workers are simultaneously under attack by the anti-gender movement, which portrays them as predatory and perverse. These movements have sanctioned and perpetuated harmful policies, practices and violence. Impacts on sex worker rights organising and advocacy. Anti-rights movements have attempted to undermine sex worker rights organising and advocacy. Anti-rights movements promote hostile environments within advocacy and policy-making spaces and attempt to block sex workers' meaningful involvement. Anti-rights organisations are receiving increasing funding for their advocacy, while sex worker-led organisations remain underfunded. Recommendations: fully decriminalise sex work. Identify the tactics of anti-rights movements and develop strategies to counter them. Increase funding for sex worker-led organisations. Strengthen cross-movement alliances between sex worker-led organisations and other human rights stakeholders. Promote the meaningful involvement of sex workers in all discussions, policies and platforms which concern them.